Good evening, folks. How are you all doing? I think I want to say it's probably been a week or so since I last spoke to you guys. Not been streaming quite as often as I would have liked to. But to be honest with you, I've felt, especially in the last week, that my time has been better spent trying to learn things and to try and watch the news and to try and delve a little bit deeper into my understanding of stuff that's happening at the moment. Um, because I think that certainly since Donald Trump came back into office, and then obviously you see the rise of Reform UK in this country as well. There have been little red lights that have been flashing in my head. Some little, some quite a degree larger and brighter. Saying this isn't good, Swiss. You should be concerned about this. And what I've been trying to figure out from, I guess, even the word objective is a little bit loaded, but I suppose what I've been trying to figure out is just how concerned I ought to be. Take Donald Trump, for example. There's debate on whether or not to classify him as a fascist or not. And sort of historically, as far as Trump's been concerned, say since 2016 per se, certainly in his first term as president, I wouldn't have referred to him as such. And I was very embedded in the mindset of the time and going, the left always calls everyone on the right a fascist, the right always calls everyone on the left a communist. And by the way, that still holds fairly true. The trouble is, of course, that fascism, communism, and I don't know, neo versions of those things do obviously exist. They are a real thing. So from time to time, calling those things by that label will be the accurate thing. But the problem is trying to distinguish, okay, is this the real McCoy, or is it a little bit of hyperbole when someone says that? And certainly in the case of Trump term one, he had bombastic anti-immigrant rhetoric, very offensive things that he would have no problem saying at all. Generally, I would say a disregard for the norms of democracy, and certainly didn't seem to shy away as much as what one would hope a respectable politician would from having distinctly white supremacist or far right groups supporting him. Which again, little alarm bells there. But nonetheless, I thought that doesn't quite match up with what the image in my head of what a true real McCoy fascist is supposed to be. However, that said, the back end of the Trump presidency, January 6th, all the rest of that certainly did make me go, oh, all right then. This is a guy that's willing to claim that the election's been rigged when he loses it. And those actions are going to end up leading to some pretty nasty, violent situations. Okay, noted. Then Biden came in, and for a little while, the prevailing wisdom amongst some, and I probably bought into it as well, was, well, look, Trump was a bit of an aberration. He was a bit of an aberration. Something that a bit of an anti-establishment twinge. People wanted to try something different. He managed to capture the mood and the moment of converting Tea Party Republicans into the MAGA lot. But Biden is here, business as usual, so to speak. Trump will probably end up in prison for one thing or another eventually. And then obviously, as we know, that didn't end up happening. And Trump ultimately won the election against Kamala Harris. Now, I think in the fallout of that election, I'd done a stream sort of saying what was the real crux of why Trump won, and I said it's the economy, stupid, because it's always the economy. And in fairness, there's a great deal to do with that being the case when you look at, I think, not just the United States, but when you look at a lot of countries in the West, we'll say, as far as how they've responded to inflation. And other things, that there has been a real anti-incumbency vent, and it's happened all over. It's had left wingers turfed out for the right wingers turfed out for the left, yada yada yada. Although more broadly speaking, I'd say that there definitely seems to be a bigger, more stronger movement towards the populist right than there is a equivalent with the left at the moment. I'm not saying that left-wing populism doesn't exist. It certainly does, but certainly the right-wing populists seem to have charge of the political moment right now. I nearly said moment at the moment. I thought no, that won't do. So there's a little bit, certainly, do I feel better off than I did 4 years ago? What's the price of things in the shops? Yada, yada, yada. You say, well, it's not the way that I'd like it to be. These people have been in for 4 years. The other person saying that they'll sort it out, get rid of these guys, give the other one a try. But I don't think that I had paid enough attention to two other things. First of all, being Americans' thoughts on immigration, especially the high levels of illegal immigration, coming over the border in Mexico, which I knew was a factor, but I probably hadn't uh, given it as much weight as possible. And then I think just more generally, sort of tying into economics a little bit, but at the same time, not quite. Just a more general sense of outside of just things have been bad for the last few years because of inflation, but a much broader feeling amongst people that things haven't been working for them for the past 30 or 40 years. And as much as you could say, oh, well, Donald Trump was already president. Did things magically become all fixed when he was the first time around? No, but I think in that election versus Kamala Harris, certainly when there's a thirst out there amongst the population for change and for things to be different, and you have an incumbent that says, I wouldn't really do anything that different from what Biden did, and then you have Trump, which is, at the very least, pretty darn different from what they're offering. And of course, all the rhetoric is, I'll fix immigration, I'll make the economy fantastic, your lives are going to be great, new American golden age and whatever. It makes enough sense things would go that way, as far as him being the change agent for people wanting larger, more substantial change as well. And of course, I think you're seeing a similar thing in this country right now as well with Reform UK. You're seeing that the Tories were in for 14 years. The Labour Party have been in for a short while, but they're not very popular. Certainly, again, immigration I think is also a factor. Immigration has risen hugely over the last few decades, but especially in the last few years. And the Tories being the party of we will get immigration down to the tens of thousands. Obviously has not manifested. In fact, it's gone in the opposite direction. So I think long-term Tory voters who have backed them over that issue, amongst others, do feel very let down by that. And again, you can look at the more immediate situation of the consequences of inflation in this country as well, and the fact that the cost of living has gone up, the energy prices, etc. And again, a general sense of our standard of living is not as good as it has been recently. Are you sorting it out? Replace it with a different party. Are you sorting it out? Do I feel any better off than I did now? Just a thirst for things to start improving and feel better quite soon. But again, I will say in a larger, broader context as well, in this country at least, you have seen over the course of the last 10, 20 years, a gradual shift away from clearly defined two-party politics towards a much broader range of options being voted for, people being less tribal in the way that they vote, people being more willing to vote for change. Of course, 2017 and 2019 elections bucked that trend somewhat, but as I've said in previous streams, I think that Corbyn and Brexit were definitely factors in those. But if you sort of plot it on a graph of, I don't know, the last 20 or 30 years, you can see a pretty distinct change towards the two main parties having lower vote shares and other parties coming along. So I think that's a factor in there as well. So I go back to the original point that I was talking about at the start of this video. This is the background to explain, where we are now. Donald Trump's in the White House. Reform UK is leading the polls in the UK. Pardon me. But I go back to the original point, which was trying to figure out how to classify the politics of Donald Trump, because obviously inherently it's something that I instinctively and somewhat viscerally am opposed to, not just because of the right-wing nature of it and me being a person who's on the left, obviously there's going to be some differences there naturally. But the type of rhetoric there, and the trampling over democratic norms, and I'd say generally speaking, just the general disregard. Well, I mean, within America, at least, the disregard for the values of democracy, but rather it's just a means to an end. I will get in power, and I will say and do anything to get into power, and I will say and do anything to attempt to not be out of power at the end of it. Very concerning. But then also, obviously, since he came to power, what we've seen about the things that he's willing to put out there about Canada, Greenland, Panama, the tariffs that he wants to throw on people, and putting tariffs on people. There's nothing inherently evil about it. You can certainly argue that it's not an economically coherent policy. You can certainly say that. But generally a shift towards not speaking softly and carrying a big stick, but shouting and throwing a medium-sized stick out there to whoever you might be able to swipe. I don't know, something like that. But certainly as well that Trump has seemed thus far to be harsher on people who have historically been considered to be US allies, people close to the United States under different leadership, and hasn't really gone after in such tough terms the sort of superpower rivals that he's had a lot of rhetoric against, like China specifically, but then also Russia. And it has made you question, well, just what the hell's going on? What's the agenda? What's the direction he's taking America in? In a sense, I guess it is self-explanatory to a degree that for a long time he's been saying America first, and then he's doing his version of putting America first, and then suddenly we're surprised by it and going, oh my god, he's doing the thing that he said he was going to do. But I just think we couldn't quite have imagined just what that would feel like in action, taken to the nth degree that he's now doing it. And we've seen in the last few days the ramping up towards talks, hopefully to end the Ukraine war. But it's telling in some ways that a lot of the positions it seems that Trump is going to adopt in these negotiations, he's already putting out publicly, already ruling out. Well, certainly ruling out Ukraine being a part of NATO, which is somewhat understandable, given that they've got ongoing territorial conflicts. It might be a bit tricky to say get Ukraine in there as much as I personally would probably like to see it. But also things like, this isn't going to be our problem anymore. United States, whatever happens after this negotiation with Putin, we're not taking part. We're stepping on back. It's not going to be our troops involving it. It's Europe's problem. It's Europe's mess. They can take care of that themselves. And then I think the fact that the other day he had a very long phone call with Vladimir Putin first, and then spoke to President Zelensky second. I think that's quite telling as well. That he's adopting much more of a mindset of I'm a big strong leader. Vladimir Putin's a big strong leader. We're going to sort this out between us, and I'll let Ukraine know what the end results are. Now, maybe it's not quite as simple as I've put it there, but that's certainly what it appears to be. But what I was coming back to saying is, first of all, laying out those positions ahead of the negotiation, something doesn't quite sit right there. But we'll wait and see. I will say some things, to be fair. That as far as what Trump has said about Europe, the general sense of Europe needing to step up and fund their own defense, and they can't just exist under the umbrella of the United States, that much I completely agree with, and that much I think is absolutely within the self-interest of the United Kingdom, Europe, and everyone else for that matter. That it probably is true that for too long we've coasted along on the so-called peace dividend of being able to reduce military spending after the end of the Cold War, to spend it elsewhere, and that was when the world appeared to be becoming a safer place. And then certainly, I think within the last decade or so, it seems that the world is now becoming a more dangerous place once again. So, of course, it's quite pragmatic and sensible as a country to say we should be increasing our defence spending. We should have a decent-sized standing army. We should have the ability to defend ourselves if needs be, or to go and defend an ally, rather than being caught with your pants down, so to speak. So all of that. That is common sense to me. That is common sense. But what is incredibly regrettable, I think, first of all, is just the overall situation with Ukraine. The facts that because of just things as they are, obviously the United States has thrown a incredibly large proportion of money, weapons, and all the rest of it towards Ukraine in their efforts to fend off Russia over the last few years. European countries, the UK, we have contributed, but there's absolutely no doubt that if the US was not party to it, then it would be a severely diminished amount of support that we'd be offering them. So it's unfortunate in a way, I think, that because of that situation, and yes, I'd say that I'll say we as Europeans, not to be confused with me saying the EU, but we as Europeans more broadly, there we are, Switzerland's involved as well. We did drop the ball. We have dropped the ball. And I think that this is clear evidence of that. But what's regrettable, of course, is that Ukraine's continued chance of being able to fend off Russia very much depends on continued support from the United States. If Trump withdraws that support and says no more money, no more weapons, no more anything, Ukraine just cannot do it. In theory, maybe as Europeans, we'll come together and we'll say we will, try and fill the gap. But I think that would require a really significant ramping up of our own manufacture of weapons and other things from a starting point that is relatively low. Now, of course, since the Russian invasion, I think certain European countries have been increasing defense spending and other stuff, but I still don't think it's at the level that we could immediately jump into that void left by the United States to be able to offer an equivalent amount of support for Ukraine there. So the situation as it presently stands, which is incredibly unfortunate, is that it seems that Trump basically does hold the cards in terms of how this thing is going to end up being settled, because he could either theoretically he could either say we will withdraw United States support from Ukraine and then Russia can just have at it, or we could throw the full weight of the United States behind Ukraine, more money, more weapons, more everything, far, far, vastly more than we have before, and Russia would be absolutely obliterated. So, the United States very much holds the balance of power here, and they can affect the course of the war in a way that Europe really isn't in a position to do at the moment. But obviously, from what it seems that Trump's looking to do, is it's probably going to end up being a piece where Russia holds on to. Again, I'm speculating here because I'm preempting where things end up, but it looks at the moment as if you'll end up in a situation where Russia ends up holding on to more of Ukraine than they had pre-2022. So this isn't even sort of going, all right, then they keep Crimea because they've had that for over a decade or whatever, or the regions in the east. But no, it seems like I think even some of their territorial gains since 2022, it looks like they'll probably be able to end up keeping, leaving Ukraine as a bit of a rump afterwards. And of course, then the big concern is to say, okay, then, well, there's been a deal made on paper that says, stop warring. Russia leaves. This amount of territory goes to Russia. Ukraine's not going to be allowed to join NATO or whatever else. United States is no longer going to be there supporting Ukraine. And then it becomes the impetus very much does come on Europe to support Ukraine. I mean, don't get me wrong. Ukraine won't be sitting idly on their hands. They'll be rearming themselves as much as possible as well, anticipating Russia eventually coming back for more. But if the US really does choose to vacate the field here, then it is very much going to fall to the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe to um, not only try and help support Ukraine's security, but all of our security for that matter. There's other European countries near Russia which potentially could be under threat. Maybe a slightly different ball game now that some of them have joined NATO. Although the viability of NATO has definitely been cracked, weakened somewhat recently. I'm not necessarily saying it's done. I don't know enough about the situation to say that, but I've got no doubt from what I've heard from a lot of different commentators and people like that does seem to be the situation. So yeah, it very much is we step up because a fellow European country, a fellow democratic country, one that exists as a very big buffer state between the European Union and Russia. You just don't want that happening to them again. And I hope for that to that end, at least, even if they're not going to be joining NATO, that if Ukraine decides they want to join the EU, for example, that maybe the EU speeds that up along, and that might help forge closer ties with them and the rest of the continent. And obviously, we had our Starmer and Zelensky 100 years UK-Ukraine partnership announced a few weeks or a month ago or whenever it was. So on paper at least, you would assume that therefore means, well, don't you worry, the United Kingdom is going to do everything that we can to continue supporting that country if the US does vacate. I trust that will happen to some capacity, absolutely. What I am unsure about is whether or not we will do enough and take the threat as seriously as we ought to. I really do hope that we do. By the way, guys, I see that there's a lot of comment. I'll tell you what, this is a good time for me to take a break, actually, because this is a much longer talk that I wanted to do, mainly about Donald Trump and classifying fascism. But I've taken a very long, winding road to get there, and I've veered onto Ukraine because it's relevant. So I'll use this as a nice little intermission, I suppose, and I'll take some of your comments, and then I'll get back onto topic. Oh, excuse me. I've had a bit of a cough for a few weeks. It is actually getting better. Don't think that I'm coughing like this like all day, all the time. The problem is, I think, especially when I'm streaming and vaping admittedly, but especially when I'm streaming, I think because I'm talking so continuously, it strains my throat more than it otherwise would. So Apollo TD says, "Hi Swiss, feel old today. Turned 25. 25. Why did I have it in my mind? Oh no, silly me. Sorry, Apollo. I was confusing you for one of the other viewers for a moment there. Even though I've just read out your name, Apollo TD, and I know who Dan Hill is. You've just turned 25. Why? I mean, I knew that you were younger than me, but I guess I just hadn't quite realised how much younger than me. 25 is the age that I was when I ran to be an MP in Stoke-on-Trent. I'm now 31. How time flies. Anyway, happy birthday to you, Apollo TD. Let me skim along through this. Josh T says Reform can't claim to care about illegal immigration anymore since they voted against Labour's border bill. I don't know. I don't know what within the border bill Reform objected to by voting against it, but I'm going to assume, Josh, that from Reform's perspective, they've probably come up with some issue with it, saying basically it doesn't go far enough, or it would be ineffective, or blah blah blah, something like that. Which given the size of Labour's majority and the fact that the thing would be likely to pass anyway, they can afford to do that kind of performative opposition to it, because there's no chance of it having failed anyway. I think, because I see where you're coming. I totally get where you're saying, oh, come on, Reform. You want to sort illegal immigration. Here's Labour trying to do something about it. You're not supporting it. What are you playing at? But I'll be fair to Reform and sort of say, just because they've opposed Labour's bill, I don't think that means that, come the 2029 general election, reforms going to go all soft on illegal immigration all of a sudden. Lee Hallam says, definitely not the speak softly bit. Hello there, Frank Podge as well. Lee Hallam saying of NATO, Biden had ruled it out for 10 years, which means never. Bubblevis says Trump was helped in power by the big tech companies and certain tribe billionaires, so he will do his best for these groups. Podge says the old Israeli prime minister said Biden blocked a deal in the early days of the war and promised to supply Ukraine with weapons as long as it takes. Now Trump is turning off the tap. Bubblevis says all politics will change when AI robots can do all jobs cheaply. I'm quite lucky in a way, actually. But I definitely think that with the rise of all the different kinds of AI that we've got now, there are certainly a lot of jobs that are going to be lost to it. It seems indisputable to me that will happen. I'm quite fortunate in the jobs that I've done in my adult life, being in social care and now early years education. I don't see those jobs being replaced by machines or AI just yet. I think that those ones still require a human touch. So my jobs for now at least are relatively AI proof, he says. Of course, that doesn't help the people who don't have AI proof jobs. I'm all right, Jack. But that's the first terms that I think about it. And yeah, no, you are absolutely right though. Things are definitely going to change. And there's obviously going to be some call for something to be done about it. If you start getting massively rising rates of unemployment because of people laying off staff because AI can do it cheaper, then something's going to have to happen about it, isn't there? Lee Hallam says Europe can't do anything. A third of countries are not up for helping in practice. A third have no capacity to help. That's a bit thin. I think the one thing I missed out on saying, really, which I might have skimmed over when I was talking about the UK stepping up and Europe stepping up as well. Obviously, I expect that probably there's going to be some. I expect the outcome of the Trump-Putin negotiations to be here's a deal to end the war. Russia vacates from some bits of Ukraine, but they draw a line on the map and say this bit is now owned by Russia. US says we're not going to be guaranteeing your security anymore. Europe do something, and then we try and cobble together some kind of a troops stationed in Ukraine, some kind of a peacekeeping force, try and put enough people in there, hopefully to deter Russia from attacking again. At the very least, one might hope that even if Ukraine is not a member of NATO, the fact that you will have troops and military personnel in there from NATO countries may be meaning that if Russia then attacks them in the process of attacking Ukraine, that would be tantamount enough to an attack on all to trigger Article 5, I want to say. Maybe that's the idea behind it, but like so that's what I expect to happen. Lee Hallam says it would be us, the French, the Poles, and some small Eastern European countries. Yeah, but in our case, at the very least, we have to be recruiting a lot more people in the military to be able to provide a meaningful number of people to that effort, which I think we should do. Yeah. Podge says Zelensky says he's up for land swaps with the bits of Russia they currently occupy. Him holding that little bit of Kursk isn't negligible. Obviously, it pales in comparison to the size of land that Russia controls that belongs to Ukraine at the moment. But nonetheless, I think that was a smart move by the Ukrainian military to go after a little bit of Russia, because it does give them at least a additional bargaining chip on the table compared to if it was purely just Russia had Ukrainian territory there. We reached the point where the US were forcing Ukraine to call up teenagers when we are demanding they sacrifice people they don't want to lose. It's become a lost cause. Podge says, what do you think of the government broadcasting immigration raids? Oh, crikey. I'm gonna right. I've nearly caught up with the comments, so I'll try and be quick in this so I can get back onto my my topic for today's stream. I think that clearly Labour in the last little while have been trying to they've realised the threat to them of Reform UK. I think the Tories have as well, for that matter. They probably saw it coming a bit earlier than Labour did. But clearly, I think they are now beginning to put more focus on going, okay, Reform UK is on the rise. Growth, growing the economy, and raising standards of living for people, blah blah blah. This is obviously what we want to be doing. How successful they are at it at the moment, maybe not, but that's what they're aiming for at least. I'm getting horribly off topic here. I will say that Labour have had quite a lot of different announcements over the past week in lots of different policy areas, energy, housing, obviously immigration raids as well. So they have been busy. They have been busy recently, which is nice to see. Usual caveats apply of how successful they will be in their endeavours and what there will be to show for it at the end of the Parliament. But it's not as if it doesn't seem that they've been sitting on their hands this week, which is nice. But as far as broadcasting the immigration raids go, well, you say broadcasting immigration raids. Maybe I hadn't seen that. I think I'd seen that they were showing people being put on a plane, or is that one in the same thing? That it involved immigration raids and then footage of being put on a plane. But I think I think they're trying to show, aren't they? They're trying to go, okay, immigration is especially illegal immigration is a weak spot for us at the moment, and it's something that Reform are doing very well on. And we need to try and show the public that we're being serious about it. And that involves, I think, they're trying to beef up their rhetoric on it a little bit as well. You're seeing, was it Facebook ads, possibly Facebook ads or posters or some form of stuff that Labour put out that was like deportation statistics, but they put it out there in the Reform colours on the graphics as well, which is clearly them trying to get that message through to the Reform supporters, kind of going, oh, you guys are concerned about immigration, don't you? We're concerned about immigration. We're going to try and sort it out. But I think the problem is in their efforts to try and be tough on it and to try and reach that message to people and say, we're going to be tough on it, they seem to be going far further than, like, you remember when when Theresa May was homesick and she had those vans that went round that said, I'm paraphrasing, but about if you are here illegally, go home or whatever. And there was sort of like condemnation of that, especially from people such as Labour and others, or indeed, I think back at the time of the 2015 general election, you had something as relatively tame, I thought, at least. No, actually, no, I probably didn't think it at the time because I was a bit different back then. But back when Labour had mugs that said, controls on immigration on the mug, and there was outcry at the idea that you would have controls on immigration on mugs, and what a horrible thing that was. It's interesting how things have shifted there. Now I realise I've brought up two rather different examples there that maybe wasn't entirely coherent. I suppose what I was trying to say is that I think that it's interesting to me how Starmer's Labour now seem to be going distinctly further in trying to push out what was called the hostile environment policy under Theresa May. They seem to be going way further with that kind of stuff as far as these videos go than they ever did. So that's a real about turn for them. And it seems there's something a little bit I'm using the word performative a lot today. I don't know if performative is the right word, but there's something about it that just seems somewhat unnecessary, almost slightly distasteful for my liking. That maybe they're saying show don't tell, but my interpretation of show don't tell, it isn't don't literally show me people being deported. I don't need to see that. Show me the statistics to show that you're getting a grip on immigration, that people who have failed requests for asylum are being deported, or people that have come here illegally and then commit crimes are being deported. That should be borne out in the evidence of the fact that you're doing something about it. But no, I feel that kind of video, it feels a bit like And again, different issue, but it was like when you remember when Labour put out the we spoke about this not long ago, the posters with Rishi Sunak, where they were like, "Oh, do you think should people who abuse children be put in prison?" Rishi Sunak doesn't believe that, and I thought that was very distasteful as well. And I feel that there's just yeah, there seems to be something within Labour where they're almost a little bit. On the one hand, they can appear incredibly wishy-washy on things, and maybe are wishy-washy on things. But then in their efforts to beef up being tough about things, especially on law and order, immigration type stuff, they seem to almost overcompensate and then go too far in the other direction. And I'm left kind of going, "Ugh, you're the centre-left Social Democratic Party that I would prefer to be in government as opposed to the other main parties." So no, I'm I've taken from it at the very least that they are beginning to view that issue as being more serious and seeing that reform, being able to capitalise on it, is a serious electoral threat to them. Which suggests to me maybe that over the course of the parliament they will start trying to take more steps to address the high levels of illegal and legal immigration. However, within that, I don't want to see it turning into sort of feeling like the new nasty party, feeling like there's sort of mean-spirited elements to it. It should be looked at through a lens of saying we have laws. We need to follow the laws. There are proper processes for these things, whether you enter the country illegally or illegally. If you come in illegally but you request asylum, that will be processed or whatever. But then if that is rejected, or if in the meantime you're here and you're committing crimes, then obviously you're going to be sent home as well. That can all be said in a very sort of a common sense kind of way, I think, without having to sort of go, look, we're putting them on the planes. Get on the plane. Go back. No. I don't need that personally. Podge says Article 5 applies to territory, not troops. Interesting. Okay, then. So what I'd said before about the hopes of a peacekeeping force being enough to deter, not as strong an argument as I'd perhaps hoped there. Oh, hang on. We're racking up a bunch of comments here, and I need to try and catch up with them to carry on with my topic today. Lee Hallam says all technology changes cost jobs, but other jobs replace them. People were worried about mechanized spinning machines wrecking employment. If AI doesn't kill us Terminator style, we will be fine. I suppose the thing is, Lee, at the moment, it's difficult to conceive of which jobs will come along to replace the ones that have been lost. I take your point. Historically, that has always been the case. And as far back as the Industrial Revolution, the idea of, all these machines in the factories, my goodness, we'll only have to work 5 hours a week. Everything will be done for us. And that never quite came to pan out. No luxury communism for anybody. But part of me feels that AI is a slightly different beast. I'm struggling to see where a sudden spurt of new jobs, what industries or areas they will come from the ones being replaced by AI. But I'm willing to say certainly that I don't know for sure whether or not that will happen. My instincts is that's going to be a difficult thing at the moment. But maybe it's a matter of responding to it, isn't it? All of these, a large number of jobs are lost because of AI, and then obviously there needs to be a response because that becomes the new status quo. Look at all this increased unemployment as a result of it, and then there may be new policies or industries or businesses that come along as a response to that. Yeah, okay, yeah, I can see that. So I suppose the point being, regardless, then we say that it's going to be a challenge. It's a significant challenge on the way, and that challenge will have to be met with something in order to not have it be that it's just a bunch of unemployed people. Lee says, "Are you covering that Rachel Reeves story?" Is this her? Because I know apparently she told some fibs on her CV already. Is this her fiddling how long she'd worked at the Bank of England for, or is this another a separate, different Rachel Reeves thing. Because I think what I've kind of seen recently is that she's that some of her credentials that she'd put forth, about how much time she'd spent working in finance, or what she knew in economics or whatever, didn't quite stand up to what she'd put out. Is there something more significant than that, or is it within that kind of a ballpark? Right, I'm trying to catch up with these, so apologise if I'm skipping over your comments. Yes, I see you, Chris the Clown. Josh T says Labour probably released those videos because Reform voters are all conspiracy theorists that wouldn't believe it without seeing it. I mean, I think I won't go quite as far as to agree with that point as you've worded it, but certainly I do think that there's a sense of to see is to believe. To show something can be a very effective tool in communicating it to the public, more so than just words. But for my part, I don't quite like the way it feels or what it seems to be leading to. I think that in that case they've gone the wrong way about it. I think trying to post statistics of who's been deported or whatever, and posting that in the Reform font and putting that out there on social media, that was a savvier move. I don't know whether ultimately it's going to do much good for Labour, but I think that was more on the mark of the way that I think that they should be trying to do this thing, rather than videos of people being put on flights. Did you see the cop accused of used ECHR case to stop him? But no, I've not seen anything about that, I'm afraid. And Lee says, fiddling expenses at the bank, BBC investigation. Oh my goodness. Rachel, right. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'd said only recently, I think Reeves is safe, and I don't think she'll be going anywhere, despite the economic misfortunes and the budget. But if there's legs to this, if you're saying that there's a BBC investigation into her about her time at the bank, then that maybe could have the legs to threaten her position. Obviously, I'm just hearing about that from you, so that's something that I'm going to have to look into myself. But right now, at least, I'm gonna get back onto topic, because I pivoted for quite a little while. So where was I? I was talking about Donald Trump on the world stage. The fact that he's putting America first now. He's saying, Europe, look after yourselves, basically. It seems that he's more willing to negotiate with Putin, less so from a sort of a clearly arm-in-arm position with Zelensky, and more a sort of, I'm a big power, you're a big power, let's decide between us what we do here, and you will probably just have to abide by it, Zelensky. That appears where things are at the moment. Which seems more akin to my understanding of what the world was like in the early 20th century. That seemed to be the time of great powers, superpowers. If you were a big strong country, that innately seemed to give you the authority to decide, oh well, yes, we'll draw a line on this map, and now this is this country and that is that country, and that's that, because who's going to tell us otherwise? And then obviously the post World War II sort of global nation state rules based order was a departure from that. Trump, as he is now, seems to be moving things in a direction much more similar to the way they were in the early 20th century there. Which in itself I think sets a slightly dangerous tone, because in the example specifically, we've already talked about what the consequences for Ukraine are. That's one particular thing. And I've also said, obviously, I think that it's a good and pragmatic thing that Europe and the UK, for that matter, are going to increase their own defense spending and start looking after ourselves a bit more. Fair enough, fair enough. But I think the concern is that the fact that, the United States, which previously had been seen as sort of like, the biggest proponents of the global nation state rules based international law kind of system, where we're not really supposed to invade each other, but we're supposed to talk it out and blah, blah, blah. And, there have absolutely been multiple abided by, or when countries have come up short in that effort as well. You can all think of your own clear examples, but nonetheless, that was the prevailing doctrine, that even if it was uh, not always followed, that they didn't always keep to those values specifically, it was more the norm that it was followed than it not being followed. And the fact that you have the head of the United States now very clearly, distinctly. Podge says, "Cough, cough, Iraq." Oh, where's that UN resolution? The fact that and Iraq, but by the way, Iraq's again trying to get off topic here. Iraq's a tricky one itself, because I think that Saddam Hussein was an incredibly evil person, and the Iraqis lived. I think it was a miserable existence that they had under Saddam Hussein. So it's not at all to say it was the wrong thing to have wanted Saddam to go, or maybe even necessarily to have got rid of Saddam. But the fact that it was done more sort of unilaterally by like the United States and the UK, rather than getting a wider consensus, and the fact that we didn't have a particularly good plan for going in there either. Those are serious failings of that, aren't they? And of course, every time that a country in the West or Western allied country violates its own supposedly core tenets of this, this rules-based system, it does make it somewhat easier for the enemies of our countries to point to it and go, oh, well, look at that, you're gonna. I mean, Christ, I think Russian propaganda makes a lot of meat out of Iraq. That's one of the first things they point to, where they kind of go, oh, look, there we are, see. You did Iraq, so what's wrong with us doing Ukraine? Lee Hallam says, I don't think on the whole the Iraqis were better off for it. Well, yeah, that's a real problem, isn't it? And ISIS adds that ISIS that replaced him was worse. This is the thing. I think you can say pretty reasonably from a fairly objective point of view, the way that Saddam Hussein was running that country, the serious levels of oppression towards the people, and the way that pretty sort of, I don't know if you go quite as far as calling it a totalitarian state, but it was definitely getting up there. You could say that's not a good quality of life or existence, but yeah, the fact that after that, the efforts to get rid of him, which the goal of that, at least, to say no Saddam Hussein, fair enough. The fact that the way that events then unfolded afterwards was actually, you had the rise of ISIS, you had such instability in that country that materially it probably ended up worse. I don't know. I'm not qualified to say that for sure one way or another, but I think the point being that you can believe that Saddam was an evil man and the idea of getting rid of him is the right thing, but then also go, but the way in which it was done, or the facts that it was done when and how it was, can still be the wrong thing to have done. It's a bit like I don't know, like North Korea. I don't think anyone here is going to dispute that North Korea is a fucking horrible country and it's a miserable fucking existence to live under Kim Jong-un. Whether or not you then go, it is the right thing, therefore, for us to go in there militarily and topple Kim Jong-un, I don't know. There's ramifications of that to consider. But for one thing, I don't think China would be especially pleased. I don't know. But anyway, so as we move towards so this is the danger, I think, that in basically saying that, no, you know what, the new world order really is going to be might makes right. The previous, America, the umbrella, the superpower, the one of the main countries that helped forge this sort of post World War II world order, is now being the biggest iceberg breaking off of that ice shelf and drifting off into the ocean, saying, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're a big, strong country. We're going to do whatever the fuck we want. It doesn't matter. Does that then end up setting the tone for an increasingly more dangerous and fractured world? Will there then be other countries that go, well, if the United States is acting that way, then why the fuck have we got to continue doing this? And it might start off in really small little ways, but I think if it's an erosion of that sense of there being basic rules that we're supposed to follow amongst one another in countries, then pretty quickly things that previously could have been quite manageable small disputes between countries could escalate into larger things because it becomes more normalized that you don't have to try and do things in a more peaceful or diplomatic kind of way. So yeah, that's a major concern of mine. But coming back to what I was discussing at the very start of the video, which is me as a person on the left trying to figure out what to make of the rise of this right-wing populism and exactly how concerned I ought to be. Should it be on a level of going, well, I don't want a right-wing government in, or should it be this government seems like a slightly different beast from the classic Tory governments you get, and therefore I think it will be a bit worse? Or am I concerned about, say with Trump, for example, he doesn't have enough votes in a certain state, so he calls up the person in charge and says, "Can you find me some votes?" I haven't lost the election. Joe Biden and everyone else has rigged the election. Getting into power, pardoning January 6th rioters, the stuff that Elon Musk's Doge department is doing, big serious questions over whether or not they actually have the authority to be dismantling some of these federal bodies that they are, or whether in fact that should be going to other wings of the US government rather than just the executive. Again, riding roughshod over what the democratic norms are within his own country. Again, alarm bells start to ring, little red lights start flashing in my mind, and you go, hang on a minute, we're not used to seeing this. This looks like it's going a little bit far. How concerned should I be here? Is it the F word? Is it fascism? Is it the beginning of fascism? Is it like a precursor to fascism, potentially? There's definitely overlap. There's certainly qualities that I can point to in Donald Trump and the things he's done over the past 10 years that definitely overlap with my historical understanding of what fascism has been. That much is pretty indisputable. But in the effort to try and figure that out, I've spent the last week on YouTube, and I've been going back over sort of historical examples of fascism, and most specifically the rise of Hitler in Nazi Germany. I've spent quite a few hours in the evenings over this past week really trying to educate myself on exactly how that came about and what the process was of Hitler coming to power, and what the parallels were there. So I'm breaking it down in a very, very condensed version here. And I'm, I'll try and say to you guys, I'm not an expert on Nazi Germany or World War II, but this is what I'm trying to be researching myself. And obviously, Hitler and the Nazi Party. At first, their efforts actually were to try and overthrow the government militarily. The beer hall putsch. Which ultimately failed before it really got off the ground. But the point was that was their initial aim, to kind of go, we'll take over this area, the soldiers will stand with us, and then we'll go march and we'll have the whole country. That obviously didn't work. Hitler ends up in prison for a little while, but there's enough people sympathetic to him that it's not a particularly long sentence, and it's not a particularly bad time in prison either. He gets visited by publishers and people that he can dictate Mein Kampf to, and ultimately writes the bulk of that while he's in jail. And then when he gets out, he says, we're going to be doing things in a different way now. We're going to be doing it democratically. We're going to try and win power within the Reichstag, rather than try and overthrow it militarily. Now, in Hitler's Mein Kampf, he made absolutely no, but the real crux of Hitler's ideology and Nazism was the idea that you were separating people out by their races. That you had these particular races. You had sort of a hierarchy of races, even to the point that you'd be trying to measure people by who was your grandmother or your great grandmother, and how pure is your blood, and some weird ideas about measuring people's skulls to decide what kind of race they are and whatever. And absolutely at the bottom of that totem pole, as far as Hitler was concerned, was Jewish people. And he obviously uh, to say he was anti-Semitic seems like it's really underplaying it, because I think Hitler and Nazism is the ultimate anti-Semitism. It is the archetypal anti-Semitism. It's the most extreme um, and the most damaging anti-Semitism that's ever existed. So I really can't emphasize that enough. I mean, it ended with the murder of millions and millions and millions of Jewish people, amongst other groups as well. Um, so Hitler made absolutely no bones in his early days about the fact that, the Jews were the cause of all the problems, and something needed to be done about them. At first, it was that he wanted them all out of the country. Later, it was that he wanted them eradicated. Part of that was his. What I don't quite have a grasp on yet is quite how much of Hitler's own propaganda he believed personally. I think he was pretty deep in his own created echo chamber, if you will. But I think at one point it sort of said, "Oh, if the Jews pull us into another world war, then we're going to have to get rid of the Jews." Pretty early on, well before the Holocaust. But anyway, we know what happened with World War II there. But what I was saying is, what happened with Hitler's rise to power is that, in addition to the Nazis pursuing getting elected, you also had the SA and later the SS, but groups associated with Hitler and the Nazis that would go around, smashing up Jewish shops and fighting in the streets with communists or intellectuals or basically anyone who who opposed Nazism. So you had sort of like a thuggish paramilitary wing than sorry, I've been distracted here by a Lee Hallam comment that says the first thing to say is that not to say that Nazis are typical fascists is wrong. Other fascists did have all the race theory. Hitler definitely believed it all. Didn't other fascists didn't have all the race? Yeah, no. I agree with that point. I don't know if that was responding to what I'd said, but I'd said the archetypal anti-Semites rather than saying the archetypal fascists. But I don't think that's what you were saying. But yes, yeah. I was going to come on to that. I was slowly working my way towards that to try and draw distinctions between Nazism, fascism, and everything else. But so yeah, Hitler had these sort of paramilitary groups as well, which would go around to be very thuggish and intimidate people and all sorts of other stuff. And gradually, over the course of a number of elections, he was able to get a hook into the Reichstag. I think that he only came to be, he sort of didn't have a majority that he needed there, but he came into power with the support of, I think, like a conservative group or other conservative or far right parties as well. And ultimately he used what was believed to be a what's the word I'm trying to come for here? Like a false flag attack on a fire being set, saying, "Now I need emergency powers to go after the Jews and the communists and all the rest of that." And in the end, he was able to get that. And then as soon as that was done, it sort of finally veered over into going, "Oh well, I've got these emergency powers which can be renewed every few years by a vote in the parliament. But guess what? The parliament is now full of 100% Nazis, so I'm always going to get these emergency powers." Yeah. So his dictatorship of Germany was enshrined within law, and it came about through, I don't want to say regular processes of democracy, because what happened was an absolute perversion of democracy. But the point being that he had his Nazis elected. They formed a government with other people. There were positions being appointed. You still had the president of Germany having a role there as well constitutionally, and it was the passing of certain laws, and he was only able to become by law officially basically the dictator of Germany by getting a law passed in the first place to put him in that position as well. So obviously there was all kinds of things around it, such as intimidation of people and the paramilitary wing and beginning to try and purge opponents and all the rest of it. But but that framework of, in the case of Hitler, a fascist country and a fascist dictatorship actually emerging through a democracy rather than just overthrowing a democracy. I think that's the key thing to think about there. Um, that's the way it ended up coming about. So I come back to Donald Trump. I come back to Donald Trump and the question of whether or not Donald Trump is a fascist or not. And having tried to look into, I mean, I take the point actually, that Lee says, by the way, that Nazis and fascists are not one for one, and that's true. Nazism is a version of fascism, but fascism is it's a bit like saying, Stalinism is a brand of communism, but not all communism is Stalinism. Nazism is a brand of fascism, but not all fascism is Nazism. I'll read a few more of these comments before I continue on quickly. Fascists always have a military wing. They tend to have either a conservative or conservative, religious, or socialist origin. They are nationalistic and operate using highly centralized control. They are intolerant of free speech. Okay, so now we come to the point of comparing it to Donald Trump, and we try to say, okay, then is Donald Trump a fascist? Well, actually, I'll take some of these points from Lee. Actually, we can go through them one by one. Fascists always have a military wing. I wouldn't say that Donald Trump has a military wing per se. Not a formalized military wing in the way that you would have had like the SA in Nazi Germany. But you can probably point to sort of like the far right groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, some of those that were involved in January 6th riots, some of those that, by the way, have been pardoned by Donald Trump and are now back out in the country again. They weren't bringing, they weren't shooting up the place on January 6th. So do you want to describe that as being a military wing if it doesn't involve sort of military grade weapons, but it's still a group? It's still a group with very extreme views that support that person, that are willing to go out and do violence on behalf of that person. So that much you can say, okay, that there's some similarities there at least. It doesn't seem like a one for one, but there's some similarities that are concerning nonetheless. They tend to either have a conservative, religious, or socialist origin, says Lee. Well, I mean, I think conservative religious definitely does it. As far as Trump's MAGA movement go, they've got there's a real. I think it would be wrong. I think it might be. I wanted to reach for the phrase evangelical right at first. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, because I feel that maybe that, or maybe something similar to that, has morphed almost into sort of like a Christian nationalism that's part of the wider MAGA movement. But there's definitely a component of that there, at the very least. There's something there's something to do with it. What else have we got? Intolerant of free speech. Well, this is the one that probably runs counter to it, actually, depending on the way that you want to look at it. On the one hand, you could look at, for example, Donald Trump's, I don't know, like disdain of the press, and calling everyone fake news and all that sort of thing. That he doesn't like to be challenged or disagreed with at all. And he's got a disdain for that part of the country. Well, not the country, but the whole setup of what the state is. That press. He's absolutely got a disdain for it. However, I wouldn't say that Trump in his time in office in round one or round two thus far has sort of, like, to my knowledge, passed any laws trying to crack down on the free press per se, or I don't know, sending Proud Boys or Oath Keepers to go to CNN offices to storm the place and drag people off or anything like that. That obviously hasn't happened. Although you can bring into this slightly more complicated element of like big tech and say that how many of Trump's present big tech allies now actually own a number of the news or journalistic outlets. That's the thing to keep an eye on. Um, but no, I don't think that he's clamping down on free speech. I mean, if anything, you've seen the likes of Elon Musk, who's closely allied with Trump, being a big proponent of free speech. Now, he bought X, saying that it was going to be for free speech, and has obviously brought a lot of people back onto X that had previously been banned off of there. Not exclusively, but generally, being on sort of the extremer ends of the right there. But I think Musk is basically using X as a megaphone for that particular set of thought and ideology now. So free speech, yes, but more speech for me than for you, maybe. So yeah, I can't yet say that I think that there's a solid case to be made that Trump is going after free speech at the moment. Although I don't necessarily think that Trump really believes in a lot of these things. I don't think he believes in the value of a democracy. I don't think he believes in the value of free speech. I think that he views these things as obstacles to get around towards what his goals are, wanting to be the center of attention and at the height of power. But at the same time, pardon me, but I forgot where my point was going with that. Sorry. The test is, has Musk banned those he opposes from X? There have been a handful of cases where I've seen him do so. Yeah, where I think he's suspended or banned accounts that that he's come into dispute with on X. So I can't say whether I don't necessarily think that's being done in a widespread kind of way, that Musk is kind of banning, for example, a big blanket sort of everyone on the left or everyone who's progressive or any of that sort of thing. But in Trump's not Trump, sorry, in Musk's sort of I don't like people disagree with me, and I have this big button in my hand that controls X. So you know what? Fuck you. Your account's suspended. He's definitely done that on a few occasions. But that seems to be more a misuse of Musk's personal power at the head of X rather than a coordinated effort to suppress what people are saying on X altogether. But again, that said, he controls the algorithm. And the algorithm has absolutely tilted way towards the MAGAs and the far right and the conspiracy theorists, because that is what I very clearly observed and made me decide I didn't want to be on X anymore because I wasn't enjoying it. We'll go back to this one. Another one here. What did you say? Trump isn't a religious fanatic. Bush was, not Trump. He is conventionally religious. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think that I don't think that Trump is religiously fanatic. I think that there's a chunk of his supporter base that are. I don't think that Trump personally is. You're right, but Bush was religious. Blair was religious. I don't think Trump doesn't strike me as especially religious, other than the fact that he will talk about God occasionally. Podge says Elon is threatening with arrest if you just name the people who work at. Yeah, I'm very concerned about Elon and Dodge. I don't think there's any oversight into what he's doing there. Really, there hasn't been I mean, occasionally you've had a judge say, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that," but considering that, like, you have to have like these, Senate hearings to confirm members of Trump's cabinet, and they get to spend time sort of quizzing them and sort of saying, are you appropriate for this job, blah, blah. I mean, ultimately, in my opinion, at least, it's like, well, fucking RFK Jr. still ends up in charge of health. So whether the system works or not, I don't know. But at least that's what's supposed to be there in saying, these are the checks and balances, and we approve of who's appointed to the cabinet. Trump never appointed Musk to the cabinet. Musk and Dodge sort of exist as this weird sort of organization and group with very vague, ill-defined powers that just seem to be going around doing stuff right now. And there's not really an awful lot of definition of whether or not he's allowed to be doing the things that he's doing, whether he has the powers to be doing the thing that he's doing. But right now, by and large, maybe there'll be more opposition to it at some point. But by and large, right now, the view of most of the Republicans, at least, seems to be, Trump's the executive. He's the head honcho. He said he'd be doing this kind of stuff in the election campaign. maybe it's unconstitutional, but we're not gonna raise that alarm at the moment because we're not necessarily opposed to what he's doing right now. But again, I'd be concerned with that. So and finally, for the final point, I think worth is mentioning is that Donald Trump does absolutely have a cult of personality around him. There's definitely an element of that. It's not quite to the degree that of a Hitler at his height of power, but yeah, there's definitely amongst not everyone who voted for Trump, obviously, because it was about half of the American country that voted for Trump, but amongst what I'd call the MAGA base, there's a proportion of them that seem to view Trump as whiter than white, holier than thou, or in fact even can do and say all sorts of awful things, but it doesn't matter because he's our guy and everything he's ultimately going to do is part of a 5D chess game and it's in all of our best interests. And if you don't understand, just wait and trust whatever the plan is, or that kind of thing. But basically, not seeing him as particularly fallible. There are people out there who see Trump that way. Lee Hallam says he definitely does have a personality cult, but so did Obama. Perhaps. But Obama definitely had quite a thing about him at the time. Maybe because Obama was longer ago, and I'm not remembering as well. But I feel as if the flavour of the personality cult seems to be a lot stronger around Trump at the moment. But there we are. So, having said all of that, then, having used the Nazis as my specific example to compare it against, but of course, us saying that we are not saying that all fascists are Nazis. It's our most clear-cut example that we are most broadly familiar with in our history. It seems that ever since World War II, Western culture has been forever waiting for the next Hitler, saying, remember Hitler? Remember the mustache man? Watch out for the mustache man. If someone comes along and does the things and says the things that the mustache man does and says, we need to be ready for it because he could come back one day in one form or another. Which, isn't a bad thing at all, because the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust, it's like, the whole idea was to say, teach the future generations about what's happened and say never again, never allow it to happen again. When you start to see the beginnings of that kind of thing, you need to be really fucking vigilant. Otherwise, you will repeat the same mistakes of that. So no wonder we've spent the last 80 years watching out for the next Hitler and thinking that the next Hitler could be around every corner, potentially. So how about Donald Trump? Is Donald Trump the next Hitler? No. From what I've gathered, from what I've looked at, in the rise of Adolf Hitler, the ideology that he espoused in Mein Kampf, and all the rest of it, is Trump a comparable figure to Adolf Hitler? No, I wouldn't put them on par with one another. I would not say that Donald Trump is the next Hitler. I'll get that much out of the way first. And therefore, also, I do not think that Trump is a quote-unquote Nazi. I don't believe that Elon Musk is a quote-unquote Nazi either. But I do think that Elon Musk is, if not far-right himself, incredibly sympathetic to far-right movements and views. And he may not have done that salute to tell the American public, I am a literal National Socialist Nazi. But it might have been to go, haha, look at this. I'm gonna throw my hand up and do a fascist salute in plain view of everyone and then deny it afterwards. What a really funny troll. Ha ha. I threw my hand up to own the libs, So no, Trump's not the next Hitler, and they're not Nazis. What about fascists then? Not as specific as Nazis, but what about fascists? There is overlap. There are things in the Donald Trump playbook and his actions and his associations, the people that support him, wishing to ultimately override the norms of the democratic system that he's coming to power in. There is overlap there. it it doesn't quite seem to be going to the full extent. Now, some may argue, well, maybe it's not there yet. Maybe that's the end goal. Maybe right now we're still in a sort of a metamorphosis kind of state. You start off with a little right-wing populist MAGA caterpillar, and in the end you end up with a big fascist butterfly, and maybe we're somewhere in the middle. Now, that particular argument, the only way to prove or disprove that one is to watch events and see how they are borne out. Really, you can't say one way or the other from this particular point. Going, okay, well, I can, indisputably say it will or it won't. But the fact that, as I keep saying, I've seen overlap, that there are common traits between Trump and fascism, then you could probably say that he in some ways is fascistic in nature. I think that's fair enough. I know that there's a term that exists, neo-fascist, which I don't know what the exact definition of that is supposed to be as opposed to fascism, but my guess is it's a slightly foggier way of saying, it's not necessarily like the fascism of the early 20th century in Italy or Germany or wherever, but it has some of those traits, but then again, it's got some things that are a little bit different, but it's a bit like that. So I don't know. I guess you could make a better case for saying neo-fascist than fascist, but to be honest, I think my my core takeaway right now really is that I don't think I'd go as far as to say right now that the current Trump administration is fascist and that America is a fascist country. There are steps in a number of different areas that I think need to go a great deal further to be able to identify that as what's happening. Because right now, you could say that Trump and the MAGA movement are fascistic in some ways, but actually that is the full extent of where their ideology and likely political actions will end up sitting. Or you could say it's a slow burn metamorphosis from a caterpillar into a butterfly, and only so far has been gone so far, but further down the line, something worse could end up happening. I'm tending right now towards the first of those, in saying that there is overlap and similarities, but that it's not a much greater evil fascism waiting to happen and fully manifest itself. I'm tending towards that. The first thing I'll say is that I don't feel fully confident in saying I'm even entirely sure of what I think at the moment. That's the honest truth, despite all the thinking I've been doing about it over the past couple of weeks. But secondly, I also think, regardless of whether Trump and the MAGAs are neo-fascist or fascist or just right-wing populist with a real disregard for democratic norms, I think regardless of what definition one wants to debate is the right one for that, it doesn't change the fact that eyes should still be on what's happening. Checks and balances should try to be upheld. Difficult questions should be asked of the administration, and Republicans that are concerned about anything that Trump's doing should speak up. The Democrats should get their shit together and start trying to point out the most objectionable things, or even potentially unconstitutional things that Trump is doing at the moment. And on a more international picture, not just domestically within the US, but in a more international picture, we, the United Kingdom, other European countries, Canada, Western allies, etc., for the time being at least, we need to accept that America is no longer the ally to us that it once was. Could that change? You know, maybe Trump's out of power at some point. Someone else comes in, and it kind of begins to feel like it's reset back towards normality a bit more. Maybe, but then again, I think the fact that you had Trump, Biden, and then Trump again says that this politics, this vein of thoughts within America, hasn't gone away, and if anything, it seems to have been strengthened over the past few years. I suppose the question will be, what will happen when Trump is gone? Will it outlive Trump? Will a successor come along? And what direction will it take then? But I think all of those, everything that's been laid out thus far, says that, you know, we need to seriously start thinking about standing on our own 2 feet as far as our own defense goes, because the United States is not a reliable actor on the world stage as far as things like the Western NATO alliance is concerned, or the norms that we've been used to. So that is a serious thing for consideration as well. So I think, yeah, I think to summarize then, the way things appear to me at the moment, there is concerning fascistic actions from Trump and his associates in some areas. There are some things which are comparable, or perhaps at a lower intensity than you've seen in historical examples of fascism. But I don't think it's quite the real McCoy. It doesn't seem quite like the full thing. Now, maybe that's because it's not fascism in of itself, or the alternative theory is that there are much more evil things down the line, but right now this is just the early stages of what it is. I think, you know, I think that as much as right now I'm going to say, no, I don't think Trump or America are now a fascist country. I think that it's incredibly... Don't go, oh, phew, well, Captain Swiss says that Trump's not a fascist. So, you know, phew, boy, were we worried about all this stuff Donald Trump's been doing in the past few weeks. Ethnic cleansing in Gaza. No. It's fine. No, that's not the point I'm making whatsoever. I'm just saying that you know, we can find something to be wrong and dangerous and objectionable, even if it is not necessarily a one-for-one fit with one of the most dangerous ideologies we've seen in the world thus far. Then, of course, you could always say that, what's that old phrase? You know, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. I don't know. But yeah, my summary of that then is to say, you know, it may not be fascism as I think the textbook definition would be, but there's enough elements to Trump and the MAGA movement that should definitely cause concern, and should be resisted both domestically and internationally for that matter as well. There we are. That's my conclusion for you, boys and girls. I hope that was enlightening. Yeah, because as I say, I've spent a hell of a long time thinking about this in the past couple of weeks, and I've looked at, by my standards, you know, I think I'm a relatively well-informed person, but I will happily admit, well, maybe not so happily, but I will admit that I don't always, you know, take the, you know, I might be more informed about issues than the layman. But I may not take the time to do sort of in-depth research into things that I'll talk about. I feel that in this case, I've done my best to try and look at different sides of the argument. I've seen people that say Trump is a fascist. I've seen that people who say that he isn't. I've been trying to look at historical examples as well. And the best I can come to is, no, I don't think that Trump right now appears to be the same thing as fascism. But nonetheless, I still think it's very dangerous. And of course, you know, as norms shift, you get one leader that comes in that has a disregard for democratic norms and the Constitution and all peaceful transfer of power and all sorts of other shit like that, and is willing to say bullying things to other countries. I want Greenland, I want Canada, blah, blah, blah. You have that now, and that opens the door to it suddenly seeming more normal. And maybe Trump never pursues those things, but maybe another leader 5 or 10 or 15 years down the line goes, oh, look, the Overton window has been moved, and I will move it just a little bit further. People have been warmed up to this stuff already, and now I'm going to take it further. You know, it needs to be opposed at the stage it's at now, regardless of whether it's ultimately going to go further or not. Anyway, I will now read a few more of your comments because I've seen NA saying the comments, Swiss, the comments. Isn't neo-fash like modern white supremacist movements? Yeah, I think some of those fall under that category. Lee Hallam says a neo-fascist is a fascist with a cover of democracy. Isn't Trump's idol McKinley? That's where the obsession with tariffs and wanting to definitely. I've heard a lot about him idolizing McKinley and thinking that tariffs are a good tool to be used. And Lee Hallam says, you are right, Podge. Here's a 19th century American isolationist, although Podge retorts, expansionism isn't isolation. This is a very interesting debate as well, isn't it? Whether or not Trump is an isolationist or some kind of a neo-imperialist. And there seems to be very competing things happening out there to either side. On the one hand, you've got Trump saying, you know, we don't want America to be the world's police anymore. We don't want the forever wars in the Middle East. We want to stop being involved in that shit. And in that sense, that's seen as being quite isolationist, certainly compared to the role that America's played internationally for many, many decades now. But then when you're looking at, you know, what he says about Greenland or Canada or Panama, and again, the problem with Trump, it's difficult to know how serious he's being about these things, whether or not the rhetoric is in fact just the prelude to hoping to extract some kind of a favorable trade arrangement from these countries, or exploiting resources, or getting another military base, or whatever the objective may be. Or whether he does surprise us at some point down the line and go, oh, yeah, we have invaded Greenland. It's ours now. There we are. We'll have to see where that comes. But I suppose you could certainly say that it's imperialist rhetoric, isn't it? It's imperialist rhetoric. We've not seen imperialist actions yet, but we have seen imperialist rhetoric. What was the other thing I was going to say? There was something else as well. No, I can't remember what it was. Oh, our Russian friend is back. John Cooper says, problem is, Swiss, we had 4 years to prepare for Trump again, and Europe were clearly not prepared. And I said, remember when he said many, many times that he would get peace in Ukraine on day one? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I mean, we all knew it wasn't going to happen, but it served Trump well enough in there. But I mean, you know, what's even the value at this point in going, oh, yeah, look at that. Isn't that funny? Trump said something that wasn't true. Shock. Who would have thought, you know, the man who says that the Haitians are eating the cats and dogs. Oh, did you look at the opinion polling pages I mentioned in a prior video? No, well, not yet. But I've not done another stream looking at the opinion polls yet. So I'm not going to be doing that in this stream because this one's gone on long enough. But in my next stream looking at opinion polls at large, I will be sort of looking at a bunch of different pages there. So there we are. Listen, Russian friend. Okay, you can send me a super chat for some rubles, and then I might consider allowing you to continue to spout your whatever the fuck you're saying. Or maybe you might have to go. There's a quid pro quo on conspiracy, I'm afraid. Right. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end for today, guys. So I appreciate you sticking with me for as long as you have. I hope at the very least, I hope at the very least I get over this cough. I hope at the very least, whether you agree or disagree with what I've had to say, you could appreciate that I've tried to give it some serious thought, and I've tried to look at things by definitions as I understand them, by historical example, and by looking at specific actions and rhetoric, and trying to separate out rhetoric from actions, but also allowing for the possibility that, you know, bad things can happen down the line, but we just don't know. But I've done my best to try and plant myself in what I think is a sensible place on this, rather than because at the start of the year when Trump got in, fuck me, I had such, I was having difficulty. Like I was saying, the little fucking alarms were going off, the bells were ringing, the lights were flashing. I was going, this looks bad. This is a bad thing that's happening. But what I didn't quite know was, how concerned should I be? And the answer, as it turns out, is still quite concerned. But just maybe not that it's Hitler 2.0, which is a relief, I suppose. Can you say that Trump is the closest president to a fascist president that America has had since World War II? I think you can say that. I think you can say that it's if there was some imaginary scale, I think you could probably say that he's more similar to this fictitious fascist president than any other president has been. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But at the same time, it's like he's not even the most Hitler-esque person we can think of. I don't know. There might be some like African warlord that I don't even know about, but I think probably Putin is the closer to Hitler of any sort of person on the world stage at the moment, really. He's at least gone and tried to invade somewhere for territorial conquest. Trump hasn't done that yet. But there we are. All right then. Thank you very much, guys. Please do drop me a like if you've enjoyed the video or found it informative, and I will catch you all later on. Ta-ta.